Go live, go live. We shall go live. Yes, we shall. We shall go live. Go live. Go live. We shall go live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Scapa Flow. Yes, Scapa Flow, where it does flow. Let's see if I can get this right. Yeah, that'll go. That'll do. Hello, how are we all doing today? Right then, let's see. Scapa Flow. There is so much fun with this place. There is really so much fun with this place. But there's also a lot of things which I've forgotten with it, which is kind of interesting to start off with. I'm hoping I'm not going to make the same mistake I made in the Long Patrol, which I've left in there because honestly it's worthwhile saying, but as it was a genuine mistake rather than something I did on purpose, I can leave it on. And that was that I mistook Harkin the Fourth Harkinson for Harold the Fourth Haraldsson of Norway. Here's my honest love, Norway. Please. And this is just me asking you as a very passionate outsider who loves your country and looks forward to at some point managing to visit you and actually be a tourist in you rather than what I normally am when I turn up in Norway. And I have this humble request. Could you please, and this is just for me, this is for me, you're worse than the freaking Georges, okay? You're worse than the Georges. The British, they're bad. Honestly, I know I can't hold up much because of the Georges. But honestly, compared to the Georges, you go a little bit too far. Because it is literally not George V, George VI. No. It's Harkin the Fourth, Harkinson. And Harold the Fourth, Haraldsson. Okay? There is something going deeply wrong there. Alright? Just for me. Anyway, hello everyone. Hello Vision. I hope your train spotting went well. Hello Jack Ray. Hello Peter Dawson. Hello Dunrick Ironhammer. Hello John Shea. Hello Knight6831. Hello Graham Heinler. I wonder what the future the doc thinks the flow has. It's an interesting one. So Jack Ray, what is the flow? Scapa flow. Basically, it's a nice name for a bit of water which actually moves. Now, frankly, NATO could have made a command base for the Atlantic in Scapa. Not really. We'll get onto that. There is nothing there. There is literally nothing there. 2 war graves and those of Rex, but once it was Fort Resort. The museum opens again soon. Oh, that's always a good museum. Zaski, hello. Colin Cameron, I can see the Scapa being a northern base of the RN once again, depending on how the UK politics in the next 10 years. That would have a lot of interesting things. Hello, Angela Paul. Hello, Sage. Hello, DG40. Hello, Stephen Richards. Hello, Bob Fry. Hello, Stafford. Hello, Ian Carr. Hello, Calvin Gasberg. Hello, HMS Verdun. Hello, Dunrick Ironhammer. Hello, Jack Ray. Thank you. Iron Brew to Takeaway Fund. Actually, speaking of the Iron Brew and Takeaway Fund now, here's an interesting quirk, which I have also talked about in the Long Patrol for this. And I'm going to have to make it a feature talking about in the Long Patrols for a bit, because it's a bit new thing. To complement Super Chats, enjoy your train spotting, Bijon. They have now got Super Thanks in YouTube. And I find this oh so cute. Okay? But I also, and I'll be honest, more honest about this in a live than I would be in a Long Patrol. I've been informally told that it's likely that at least one of my contracts and the one which provides me with 3 days a week pretty much every week is likely to cease to exist at the end of this academic year. They're not sure about it, but basically there are a lot of how do I put this? It's starting to upset people that there is a historian in the engineering department and is doing all the things I'm doing. Not in a bad way, but in a sort of a way that's sort of case of going, well, shouldn't we engineers doing it? Well, the engineers don't want to do it. That's what I've been doing it. And it's worrying people. So I'm expecting my contract with Kingston to... I love working for them, but I expect it to be rolled back or to be ceased to exist at the end of this academic year. In which case, if I get another job, I'm fine. If I don't, then pretty much YouTube goes from being my second most reliable regular income source to being my most reliable regular income source, with all the others being optional extras which turn up sort of on a monthly cycle. So yeah, I'd better get good at this YouTube thing because it's looking a bit iffy. Anyway, so thank you very much everyone for your support, but that does mean I'm probably going to be doing more of a case of YouTube super chats, all those things that I'm supposed to, that I get reminded to, especially by my lovely mum who worries about me. Mainly she worries about me because the amount of people who said, oh, historian will never pay. And she's going, well, he does all this other work. He's always working. Yeah, that's the fun of life. So, that's me going, yeah, there's now super chats. There's super chats, of course. There's now super thanks. You can do an old recorded videos and other recorded videos. Literally, on the recordings, you can go through and you can do a super thanks if you want to for them. And apparently, with YouTube, people like me who produce YouTube videos are supposed to use it as a guide that, oh, that video is particularly popular, we should do more like that. I'm not saying I'm going to do that, but that's what they're suggesting. And the cash, thank you. And with some Czech special brew. Oh, thank you. The doctor's having a short already. This is going to be great. Thank you. Inkar, put a written correction on the long patrol screen. I have corrected it. I corrected it as I was going on the long patrol screen. I basically said, sorry, I got my Harold and my Harkinson mixed up. And I've left it in there. Because it was an honest mistake, and I thought it was kind of added a bit of fun. Colin Cameron, if Scotland go independent from the UK and the Orkneys and Shetland followed that by leaving Scotland, I could easily see them becoming UK or a US ally and giving basing rights for fishery production. If Scotland goes independent, I'll be highly surprised, but yeah. I do have a running theory about Scotland, which gets me into trouble, but this is this point, okay? Scotland goes independent, then they have to pick up all the bill. The worst thing for the Scottish SNP is a Labour government of the UK. The worst thing, the most advantageous thing for the Conservatives is the Labour not being able to have MPs in Scotland, which the SNP managed to deal with quite nicely by doing a plague on all things Westminster. So that makes getting us a Labour government very, very difficult if you don't have the Scottish MPs. So, you know. And as long as there's a Conservative government, they pick up the bill for Scotland and are happy to pay for it, with a little bit of racing on both sides to shore up their base, whilst not actually pushing the problem. So basically, threatening independence is a great thing for the SNP because it keeps people rallying support around them. And the SNP are a great thing for the Conservative Party because they stop a Labour government being formed, pretty much, by making it that much more difficult for a Labour government to actually come into existence. And yeah, it's a win-win scenario for both sides. Whereas going independent, that changes things. And it causes a lot more trouble, even more trouble for the Labour Party. So they would have to expend a lot of money fighting an independence campaign. So either way, it's a win-win for the It's not good if Scotland actually goes independent. Well, no one wants them to actually go, but, you know, let them have their rights, the same as we do the Falklands. Falklands had the freedom to choose, and they chose to stay. Scotland so far has chosen to stay, and so far I think they'd actually be pushing further if they thought they could win it. They're not pushing as hard as they could do. Alenka, did the RN not use HMS for land frigates in World War 1? They did. And they used it for land ship things in World War 2. Hello, Jean-Mac. JDP19, hello. Jack Ray, academic politics. Yeah. Both right. Yeah, and brew product placement fees? Tempting. Anyway, why would they want the engineers to teach people how to write and like? If we have our way, everyone would be communicating with math. The trouble is, the vast majority of people do not communicate with maths, and this is what I have to explain to engineers on a regular basis. And I think that's the other problem, because I actually did correct the maths occasionally off the engineering lectures, but we'll leave that to one side. It's fun. What about IT stuff? Could you do that again? Most of my qualifications are still valid, but I prefer not to, because the trouble with doing IT stuff, as much as I love it, it's usually contract work I've done. When I did it long term. That's the thing, I get lots of contracts. And I basically bounce from contract income to contract income. I am a great example of someone who has a portfolio career, or whatever we call them these days. But the trouble is, honestly, I like to be able to balance those with some stable incomes. And that's the point. It's easier for me to bounce from contract to contract if I have a stable, constant income. And that's what Kingston has been for many years. Even when they've forgotten to pay me, they've been my constant income. You know, I'll sort it out. Curry Hammer, apart from conservatives up here who get seriously hard time. Yeah. Salute. Yeah, I hope Doc won't mind my rewording of earlier comments in light of his words from last Friday. It'll be interesting, let's put it this way. Anyway, so we've got Canada coming up, and this is, of course, what all my funds currently are going towards, which is quite interesting watching my bank manager's face whenever I see that, and they go, oh, you've saved up money, and then it goes just whoosh out the door. You got money in, yay! It's gone whoosh. Because we are going to Canada. And I'm in Canada from the 2nd to the 12th. I get home on the 13th. And let's see, I fly out to Toronto. I get there. I am driving from Toronto to Hamilton in a rental car. That'll be fun. And then my evening, well, I have explained this in a comment, but I will also just, it's a roughly 30-minute walk from my hotel, 40-minute walk from my hotel to HMCS Haida. That is not a long walk for me. After I've been cooped up on a plane for hours, that is really not a long walk for me. So that will probably be my walk, which I'll walk to there, get some dinner, look at Haida, go, aren't you pretty, and walk back. Then I visit Scout Haida in the morning, and in the evening, well, after I've picked up Clarke and crew from Toronto Airport, we are being given dinner by the lovely Glyn Stewart. So thank you, Glyn. It's very nice of him. And then we film Haida on the 4th, and then in the evening we have dinner with the Canadian fans, which will be lovely. And yeah. In car only takes an SNP LA Alliance. The trouble is an SNP alliance with Rex Labour electorally in the UK, in England. So if Labour allies with the SNP, that gets them the Scottish seats, but that gives them a negative polling in the UK, in the rest of England. That's the problem for them. The SNP are very unpopular south of the border because they spend most of their time slagging off the English. And a lot of the English go, excuse me, we're not exactly living in clover here. So, yeah. That's the problem for the Labour Party. It's the beautiful joy of a multi-party system being applied onto a two-party system. Onto an evolutionary two-party system. Anyway. On the Sunday, so theoretically, if weather was bad on Saturday, we'll be doing the filming of Hydra on the Sunday. If it's been good, then on that day we will go to the Canadian Aviation Museum and Niagara Falls, because both of those I don't really need to arrange too much detail in advance. And then we go to a Blue Jays game in the evening in Toronto, which will be fun. If you can imagine the number of a group of English gentlemen turning up to baseball in Canada. Oh, good Lord. I'm so hoping I can arrange for at least one of our members to end up on the Kissogram. We'll leave that to one side. Right. Monday, it's hopefully the Sullivans and Little Rock. If not, it will be a steam railway. And the first public lecture. Then Tuesday, it's fly to Halifax. Then we've got nothing yet scheduled for that in the evening in Halifax. We might be getting something. And then Wednesday, it's visit film Sackville. And then we are free in that evening. Then Thursday, it's the Canadian National Archives and Museum of the Atlantic in Halifax. Their outreach sections in Halifax. And it's fly back to Hamilton that evening. Friday is left free so I can get back to Toronto, because he flies back to the UK then. Then I go to film Audra on Saturday, do a second public lecture that evening, and fly home on the Sunday. It's fun. Courage 26. Isn't the sun currently underwater? Yes, she is currently underwater. But I'm still hoping they might allow me and Drac in, because we have all our certificates. And they've been quite nice so far, the people we've been talking to. But I do realise that the people we've been talking to are not the people currently making the decisions, and they're talking with them right now, so we'll see what happens. Inca, questionary stone frigate name. Okay, as I cannot find an HMS for the World War I period. It's been in use since Diamond Rock. So, from 1803 onwards, the term stone frigate or sloop or stone sloop has been in use for the Royal Navy. For example, the nominal for example, Bermuda, the depot ship permanently berthed there was HMS Terror, which was replaced by a former troop ship, HMS Malabar, which was renamed Terror in 1901. And thereafter, when Malabar was sold off and renamed Telebar, Malabar was applied to the Casemates Naval Barracks in the Royal Navy Dockyard as a stone frigate, under the command of the captain in charge of the dockyard. And that was to which all the shore personnel at Bermuda, whether belonging to dockyard or outlying facilities, were therefore attached to. And this is because the Royal Navy Discipline Act from 1886 and a few others onwards provisions of the Act only applied to only officers and men of the Royal Navy born on the books of a warship. So therefore it had to be a stone frigate because it had to be a warship. Because it had to fit with the Act. So they had to basically deliver it up. Anyway, that's enough talking. Thank you, Stafford, for the driving advice. I will probably be going whichever way my GPS takes me at that point. But I might well start to look at things. I am hoping to. I might make Ottawa again if before I go back into geography. I sort of do this one. There are a few days chucked in there where it is possible to do some moving around, and I might possibly do a long drive. Bit of a random question, which just came to mind. Which RN ship name has had the most number of ships carrying said name? That is a hotly contested topic. And it all depends when you start carrying on the Royal Navy names, how many of the variants of names you include. But let's be honest, there is an entire book. If you want to have a go at figuring it out before we get into this. Done. Yeah. There's an entire book, Ships of the Royal Navy, by J.J. Coolidge, Ben Walrus, and Steve Bush, which lists out ships. And for example, Daring has had 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 uses of it. And you'd be surprised. Some of the names which have been used more often are for the smaller ships than the bigger ships. Because the smaller ships get replaced more often. It's fun times. Anyway, so, geography of Scapa Flow. There is a problem for it. It is always known to be quite a good port facility. It's quite a nice area. It's a good space to bring ships in age of sail and all through sort of different periods. However, there is a problem with it. Where are the Royal Navy's enemies? They are south! Occasionally they're the Dutch, who are east, but they are mainly south. They are the Catholic French, or they're even worse, the atheistic revolutionary French. Or they are the Catholic Spain. Please note there is an emphasis going on here. Or they are anyone else who's annoying them to the south. Very rare, the Royal Navy's enemies are east or north. In which case, why have a base all the way up in northern Scotland which you can't support? Then you have the legacy issue. Most of the Royal Navy's bases are from England, and from when the Navy was the Navy of England. Why? Because the English Crown had invested in infrastructure. The Scottish Crown had a navy and had some ships, but hadn't gone all in on the infrastructure. Mainly because they didn't have a population to support it. If you think about it, before you can support an army, you need enough population. You need enough population producing food that you're producing surplus food, so you can afford for people not to be working in the fields. Then, before you can support a navy, well, you need to have enough people not only producing food to support your army. You also have to be able to be producing enough goods that you're trading, so you have ships being built, because you're not going to be building an industry based off nothing. You're either going to have to import skills or build it. You're also going to have to make sure you've got enough agriculture going through. You can support people managing wood stocks and dockyards and all sorts of facilities. And basically, Scotland didn't have the population. England did. And so England builds a navy. And England has the infrastructure. And that infrastructure keeps being built on. for example, the dock, which I like to walk around, my favourite dock in Portsmouth Dockyard, the one which has the lovely M27 in, that lovely monitor. That was built by Henry VII, not Henry VIII, Henry VII. VII, Henry VIII's daddy. And that weren't even the first graving dock built in the UK by a king. Okay? They are doing this because you need the infrastructure. And they have the man, and they have the population, they have the skills, they have the money, they have the need. All these things come together, they're actually building it. Hmm. Nice again. Given the Royal Oak had to have a fuel tank drained, why aren't they doing that for the German ship sunk in Scapa Flow? Well, there's both the case of how much fuel were they actually carrying, and how much of that fuel has remained, so it's worth draining and hasn't already sunk out. And you have to remember, quite a lot of ships were coal-powered. All those ships were coal-fired, whereas Royal Oak was a full oil ship. Sim Richards, have you been aboard HQS Wellington? Yes, and I've even had dinner on that. And I've taken students around and given students a talk on her. I took the students down from the office, down from the lecture theatre, and went, right then, so we're talking about Atlantic today. Yes, right then, we're going to do it in appropriate scenarios. Took them down. They're all giggling away as I led them down the stairs, all the way through down through King's, down across the street, and took them to the ship and said, right, this is HQS Wellington, which in World War II was a sloop. And explained all the history. Well, Cameron, I need to arrange my own trip to Canada in a couple of years. Canada is lovely. Are you saying Scapa's geography works against it? Pretty much. The problem with Scapa is that, as good a geography as it is, its location means it isn't worthwhile for the Royal Navy. And then there's the whole thing of getting infrastructure up there. If the classic example I give is this. The Royal Navy can place their floating docks pretty much anywhere they want. They could have put them in Scapa Flow itself. They don't. They put them in Invergordon. Why? Not that far from Scapa Flow, but it's just close enough that it's connected to the rail network and they can get supplies and stores to it. And that's what we're talking about. This is literally as far north as you can go. You have to bring all the supplies up there. Everything has to be brought by ship. Let's be honest, which is more efficient, train or ship? If you're talking about national needs, moving around national, it's going to be train. As good and as great a ship is in terms of bringing stuff up, when you're doing repairs of ships, you're often talking about one or a few bits of something, not a huge load or something. Far easier to load up a train and send it across the country with the stuff. So, basically, the only time Scapa Flow becomes useful is when you're dealing with an opponent who's going to be coming across the North Sea. Then it becomes incredibly useful. Then it does become incredibly useful. It's also useful if you're doing operations up in the Arctic, which is something to think about for the future. It's something to think about. It's very useful if you want to have large groups of ships getting together, and that's the other criteria for it. Because Scapa Flow is a massive area. It's fine if you have a large fleet, it makes sense. But if you don't have a large fleet, and you're having to bring all the support up to support a small fleet, you might as well take that small fleet to Rosyth. Or one of the other ports which the Royal Navy has up in Scotland. it's far more economically viable and sensible. Because again, logistics doesn't just come down to getting the supplies to the ships. What ship the supplies the ships need. It's getting the supplies there, and it's working it out. If I have to go ship, train, ship to get to supplies to place, and hang on, I haven't got exactly what I need, so I then have to make an order, and it has to go back again, and it's ship, train, ship again. That's a long time. Whereas if it's just train, woohoo! That can be turned around in less than a day. Because you're not going to sail a large ship with one part, but you would move a train with one wagon, or a couple of wagons. Wouldn't you? It's an emergency train. You'll get it. Jellicoe has to organise to get enough coal for his needs up in Scapa Flow. Special coal trains. And this is before we get on to the joy of dealing with oil supplies for things like 5th Battle Squadron, which add on even more logistical needs. So how about before World War I? What was it being used as? What was its duties? Well, it actually has quite a lot. Hang on, why are you beeping at me? Sorry, I just put my Fitbit on the charger, and it's beeping at me. Someday I'll figure it out. Right. They kind of don't need to drain the high seas fleet. It got a lot of holes in them. Salvage work. There was a lot of fun trying to salvage them sort of from there. 963. Her Majesty Naval Base Scapa Float was still in use today. Would be a submarine base. No, it wouldn't be. Don't take this the wrong way, Knight, but you can't support submarines from there. You would need to build a lot of infrastructure. If it was still in use today, it would have to have a massive amount of infrastructure built in it. Because it's not connected to the land. This is the point. You have to get a ferry, you have to get ships, everything to get to it. It's not connected to the UK. If I... Give me a second. Let's try something which I haven't done before. And I go add source. And I go add what I'm looking for. Desktop 1. Right then. So, this is, courtesy of Google Maps, Scapa Flow. And this is the problem. Everything has to come by ferry. And that's always fun. And if we go in, you can actually see some of the things built in during World War II, some of Churchill's barriers. You can see the modern oil terminal. And if I get rid of this bit. Alright, if I zoom in here, this is where the area where the Royal Navy used to like to put their ships when they were parking them. They'd use this area as the exercise area from where they would fire torpedoes and shoot guns occasionally. And this was where they parked the German Navy mostly. Now, it's a lovely big space, but your big town, and trust me, it's grown massively since World War I and World War II, is Kirkwall. which is lovely, but it's not exactly close, and don't expect to reach many boats. And especially as the Royal Navy parked over here, where you can't find a lot. It's fun times, isn't it? I'm not sure how this was going to work, but I'm hoping it's working okay for you all. Anyway. So, this is what you have. And this is sort of the scenario you have. And you have Thurso up here, which is a lovely little town. But where was the Royal Navy mainly using for their infrastructure? Invergordon, which is down here. This is where they like to park the floating docks, etc., the floating dry docks, because they're nice and safe down there, but they were also a lot easier to support because you can get a railway line and other things to Invergordon and here far more easily than you can all the way across all this terrain, all the way up here to Thurso, where actually, well, when you need it, over here. So if you wanted to turn Scapa Flow into a practicing infrastructure-supported actual operational fleet base rather than a forward base, which is what it was for World War I and World War II, you wouldn't have needed to build a railway, a tunnel or a bridge, and had trains being able to get across it. You would need a railway line. I know I sound like a broken record when it comes to railways, but that is what you would have needed. Right. That should go now. Hopefully you found that useful, and hopefully that worked well for all of you. Shumack. Hello, Dan Freeman. Monhauer, first British civilian casualty caused by enemy action in World War II, died next to Scapa Flow. Yes. Hi, Dan Freeman. Sean Mack. It would be like the US citing its main naval base at Florida Keys in terms of logistics. Be interesting. Ian Carl. Significant iron ships sunk in Scapa Flow. Vanguard, World War I. Royal Oak, World War II. Any others? Vanguard? Mainly just those. Graham Allen. Martin. This was on Orkney mainland. Main island. Nice. Flying boats would be be the way to resupply a base like Scapa. Knight, I think you are trying to troll people. Either that, or you are having a good. You're in a good mood, winding people up. A very good mood. Grant Cameron, would Scapa have been more logistically viable base when the whaling ships stepped in the islands on a regular basis? Not really. Not really. It was good for them, but it was not good for anyone else. Hi, Jeff. Steph Thompson, what would it take to make a Confederation bridge structure out of Scapa? That's a four-lane deck to supply the base. A lot of money. A lot. So modern Scapa would be treated as a closer version of the Azores. Pretty much. And that's how it was really treated. Oh, Graham Hanley, you can't build a line over the Pentland. It'd be closed half the time. You'd have to build it under the Pentland. Let's be honest. On that map, what you don't realise is that you'd have to build for most of the line underneath through the Highlands would have to be built underground in order to make it work. So you would end up building a pretty much continuous tunnel. It would be kind of like rebuilding, I don't know, crossing the entire Swiss Alps again. It's just not good. In car. So Jellicoe special trains went from South Wales to Invergordon and from there to Orkney by ship, pretty much. Leaf. and Invergordon. I think. Leaf? Was it Leaf? Not sure. Yeah, building a massive bridge. Take care, stuff. Duckland95. It worked well, Doxy. What do you think of the Moskva action? Lucky shot, or was it a combination of things that went wrong? And what's the biggest shit that went into Scapa Flow? The biggest shit that went in Scapa Flow was everything went into Scapa Flow. So they all went in that. And as you mean bigger crude oil carriers, etc. have gone in there. As for Moskva, well, that's going to be covered in a bilge pump soon. As soon as Drax's back, we're going to do a bilge pump special on Moskva and the US Navy's building plans and see how the two fit together. Because a lot of commentators are combining the two, and frankly, we're going to show them where they're wrong and where they're right. But, yeah, life happens. They keep thinking about doing that between Scotland and Northern Ireland. They pay engineers for time it takes them to stop laughing each time. Actually, on the Northern Ireland-Scotland thing, you could build the tunnel. And this is the point. There was actually a serious proposal around about the time of them finishing the Channel Tunnel to build another tunnel between Scotland and Northern Ireland. That one would have been the sensible time to do it. Because that would have been a very useful infrastructure project. And if you combine that with connecting up high-speed rail, which they were supposed to do, so you'd have had high-speed rail built up the country, up the UK, gone off to Edinburgh, and it would have gone off to Scotland, gone off to the railway to Northern Ireland, and the Northern Ireland line from Northern Ireland would have gone out Northern Ireland and down to Dublin. So you could have had high-speed rail the whole way from Dublin all the way to, you know, you could have got a train from Dublin and could have ended up in Berlin. That would have been a very sensible time and a very sensible thing to do that, and that would have been probably a good idea. They haven't done that, and life has moved on. We can build high-speed rail between Birmingham and London. It's just taking us a sodding long time to do it. They used Welsh coal, not Scottish coal, to resupply Scapa. It was better. What Scottish coal was good for power plants and power stations. Ben Stewart, how's the UK upgraded their rail since I lived there? Glyn! No. We've got some projects going on. Eventually, Crossrail is going to be finished and working. Right then, on to the pre-base issues. Well, there is a lot of fun going on there pre-usage. There is the joyous and the quite fun named Harken the Fourth Harkinson. Again, Norway. I started off with this, and I'm going to continue this one. Seriously. And I speak this as someone coming from a country which has the love affair with the Georges. And I'm probably going to have more Georges. I quite like William. I understand why Charles has the reasoning he has and about not wanting to be called King Charles, because the first one got beheaded and the second one lived a very colourful life, which we all rather enjoy remembering. I can understand why he doesn't want to be called Charles, but I think William should be William. But the fact that he's now named his son George means that even if we do have a William, we're going to end up with our George not that long afterwards. So, now, the Vikings are the first people to really make use of these islands. They're the first ones to really think about them into that terms. And they're quite cool, really, in their approach. However, and Orkneying sagas is worth a read if you've got a couple of days. And please note, I'm saying this honestly. If you have got a couple of days and you can download the appropriate translation for you, it is a fun read. But you will go away looking at the world very differently than when you started it. And this is the thing I often like to point out to people. Historians go and read these things. Now, there's a very deep bit in the strait between Scotland and Northern Ireland. It's also full of unexploded elements. Yes, it is. It is. That would be quite fun to go through. I would enjoy watching them try and get there through that. We'll leave that to one side. The Vikings like the Orkneys and like this sort of area because there's lots of beaches that they can pull their ships out of the water in. And you have to remember that the key to a Viking longship is it's able to be easily maintained. That's its real key. That's the key to their long voyages, etc. When it gets damaged, they can pull it out of the water and they can repair it. When there's a nice big storm, they can pull it out of the water and repair it and keep it safe. Because it's firmly far up on the beach, so it's not going to get damaged too much, hopefully, and swept away. And that's the important thing about a Viking longship. It's easy to maintain and repair. Now, Haakon IV of Norway is one of those interesting kings. He rules from 1217 to 1263. So let's put this simply. He's in charge of a country in the Middle Ages, in the Viking era of the Middle Ages, for 46 years. And he dies happily in his sleep. From an illness, but he dies happily in his sleep. A Viking king who ruled for 46 years. Do we imagine he was an idiot or a nice person? He was probably a fairly nice person, but the kind of nice person that if you looked at him the wrong way would massacre your entire country. It's an efficient system for a ruler in the medieval age. He's also the type of person who's going to think about where he's going to basing. And his Scottish expedition is, well, under Haakon, medieval Norway reaches its greatest territorial expanse. And he has a lot of friendship with the English. And, well, he finds the Scottish a little bit annoying because he's sort of doing to the Scottish what the French are doing to the English with the Scottish. So, the French, of course, traditionally ally with the Scottish because they're above the English, and therefore when the English try and attack the French, the Scottish will come at them from behind. Well, the northern parts of Scotland are under the control of the King of Norway, so the King of England doesn't give a flying hoot about them because they're the other side of Scotland. So basically, an alliance between England and Norway is great because if the Scots attack the English, the Norwegians will attack them, and if the Scots attack the Norwegian, the English will attack them. It's brilliant. The Scottish are the sandwich in the middle going, we don't like you guys. And my family are basically sailing around going, who wants to hire us? We will take anyone's money. It works. Anyway. He was good friends with Henry III of England, and that friendship was a bit of a cornerstone of their relationship. Anyway, the trouble was, the 1263, the Scottish king, Alexander III, a good name, but unfortunate wearer of it, didn't really live up to it, decided to try and take over the Hebrides. The Scottish nobles had raided it in 1262, and Harkin heard that Alexander III planned to conquer the islands. And so Harkin takes a Ladang fleet of at least 120 ships, which we can presume was quite a large armada of troops, to the islands. And, well, he does what you normally do in these situations. Basically, he lands on the Scottish mainland, but the Alexander tries to play out the negotiations as long as they're possible, so hoping for winter to destroy the Norwegian fleet. At which point, when it gets to September, October, the Scottish try to attack the Norwegian force in the Battle of Largs. Which is an interesting battle, because it depends who you are on who you think won it. If you're... It was basically hundreds of troops from either side, not the full strength of either side. It's down on the southwestern coast of Scotland. And, yeah. The odds are, according to my family history anyway, who were watching at the time, not actually taking part, because neither side had hired us. That was terrible, so we were basically voyeurs. The Scots attacked the Vikings, expecting them to be not paying attention. And the Vikings basically beat up the Scots. Now, it gets interesting, and depends on who you're talking to exactly how it plays out, but it certainly wasn't a good area for either side's troops to deploy. Harkin goes back to the Orkneys, goes back to Scapa Flow, and unfortunately catches illness and dies. And his son does actually agree something with the Scots. But, you know, he's not the last one to have used it. Alright, so... Clarke, did they not find out there were so many UXBs that have been dumped in the sea between Norway and Scotland that even a tunnel would have unexpected danger levels? There are various ideas around it. Some of them are quite good. Some involve blowing up the ordnance, which I find quite funny. No, Scott, they electrified the London to Cardiff line, then decided it was too expensive, so stopped just past Discot. Paid the train company more in compensation than it would have cost to finish. Yeah. Charles suggested to take Arthur as a regional name. Oh, good lord. Dockland 95. King George may eventually. Louis I want Louis to have a son called Mowgli. Oh. No, serious. So Scapa to the Climb was basically inevitable after World War II ended, but why did it last? Did it last till 1958? Well, I'll be getting into that. Basically, it comes to do with the onset of the Cold War and the Arctic convoys legacy. I think they found one of the longships of the time team round about that. Yep. That's good. A nice person knows individuals who are critical to maintaining his power. Others less so. No, nice to those who are critical to maintaining his power and those who weren't a threat to his power. Then that makes sure they're friends with him for when he needs to put down the people who are threats to his power. You can weaponize niceness. Carl Cameron, you're missing the biggest thing that stopped it becoming a peacetime base. No senior officer wanted to spend time there unless it could be avoiding wartime. There's actually more to it than that, but you're not far wrong. But it's not because the officers don't want to spend time there. But remember or not, senior officers can get a base built pretty much anywhere for them. It's more to the fact that you are in a serious disadvantage when it comes to communicating with the center of powers when you're in Scapa Flow. You have serious communication issues. Aaron Cash and Graham Hanna. Ooh, the Lord of the Isles might have had an issue with that. Oh, the Lord of the Isles had issues with many things. James, just ask Canada about welcoming and niceness. Though we've been letting that reputation slip the last 20 years or so. It's pretty interesting. Anyway, now we have the next person, and our next entrance in How to Weaponize Niceness. And it is the guy for whom I have been around a ship named for him. And I have a lot of respect for him in what some people like to try and call the Wars of the Three Kingdoms. Others call the English Civil War. I tend to just call the War of the British Isles. Occasionally the War of the Three Kingdoms. But basically, you want to start off with a guy called the Marquis of Montrose, who starts out as the 5th Earl of Montrose, and then is promoted. Now, he's promoted because he does such a good job. It's always nice when you do a good job. And he is a really good and a really skilled commander. He's also an interesting commander, and he probably ends up in the position he is because he actually holds to his moderate position. He both wants the king to stop interfering, to not bring Catholicism and unite the Church of Scotland and England, but he also doesn't want the extreme Protestantism that the Covenanters want. He represents the middle of the road, and he tries to fight that middle of the road. And he does weaponize in many ways that middle of the road. And again, my family did some rare. Well, we'll leave what my family wrote at this point. One side. But he lands. One of the first places he lands is in Scapa Flow, because gathering his forces there is fine because it's nice and safe. The Covenanters can't easily get to him. They don't have ships. He does. And he spends his entire time hobbling in and out of the Highlands, basically going, hello! Beating up the Scots and running other Scots and coming back. Because let's be honest, the fight in the Scotland turns into a fight between one group of clans versus the other group of clans who've always disliked each other. Which this time, one has Word of Covenanters and one has Word of Royalists as their banners. Really, it didn't matter. It wouldn't matter what the sides were. One could have been called "We Are the Foot Lovers," and the other one's "We Are the Finger Lovers," and they would have still rallied around it because honestly, they were fighting mostly because they hated each other. And this affects the whole campaign. But he does actually do a really good job because he has virtually no cavalry, virtually no artillery, often no artillery. And he managed to run a campaign which is incredibly successful. And in the end, he's only caught out in the last battle. And of course, it's the last battle that decides the war. It's always the case. But he has a really good run. And there is a Royal Navy frigate named for him, which is currently the Type 23, which is in the Gulf. There's also the Type 23, which I will forever love because when I was a very, very young boy, I got the climb around her while she was under construction, and I went all the way through her. I mean, everywhere. There are spaces that no human has ever been able to access after I went in them because they sealed them up. I was the last human in some of those spaces. Great thing of having your dad being the architect in charge. Yeah, let's go for a tour around. Okay. Lincolnshire. I've never heard of anything called anything except the English Civil War before. Yeah, the trouble is the English Civil War doesn't take place in just England. It also involves Ireland, which is another kingdom, Wales, which is technically part of the Kingdom of England and is a principality, and Scotland, which is technically its own kingdom. And honestly, you can argue it starts with the wars versus the Covenanters in Scotland earlier, because honestly, half the reason why Charles is trying to raise an army, which gets look, and the often interesting discussion is Parliament doesn't object to Charles raising an army to fight the Scots. They're worried about him using the army to attack them. That's what causes the trouble over who will command the army. If the king commands it, they're worried the king will use that army to attack the Parliament, not the Scots. They're happy to support him having an army to go and fight the Scots. Oh, sure. Hardline phones now? Hardline phones are interesting, not to Scapa. We'll leave that one side. Wolfridge Guy, weaponizing niceness is 1/3 of the British way of war. Pretty much. Johanna, Marquis, the best general we ever produced. Yes, arguably he is one of the best generals ever come out of Scotland. He is certainly his campaign should be studied. If you are interested in at all war fighting and you want to understand about how to make the best of your own resources, he is someone you should look up and consider learning from. Duckland 95, didn't Montrose defeat a force while outnumbered 5-1 or something? Yeah, on more than one occasion. Johanna, he means those crooked mouth people named Campbell. They have a lot to answer for. Yes, the Campbells. Mm-hmm. You're so right. The English Civil War, Lord Freeman's better, I'd say, the Bishop's Wars. Tempting, definitely. Jack Ray, Scots were just happy to fight each other. Way too much. Love that part of my heritage. Basically, in the nicest way, there was an interesting conversation I had with someone recently, which was, if you're walking alone, what accent do you put on if you're in a random city? And you think you've got something, do you put on a Russian accent? This is because a comedian video going around of a guy putting on a Russian accent going, that'll scare them away. And I was going, no. I just start sounding full Scottish. I go full Scottish. And then just go, you're not gonna take me. You can? You really want to play? You want to play me? Because, in the nicest way, Russian, they're scary. Scottish, they'll fight just because they feel like it. I love them. They will, but they will. They'll fight just because they feel like it. Anyway, so why is Scapa Flow chosen in World War I? Well, it's an interesting choice, but basically it comes down to this. No one's actually prepared any of the bases they're supposed to be using. They have looked at Invergordon, they've looked at Rosyth, they've looked at all these things, and they could be a wonderful base. No one's built them at all. No one has done anything for them at all. They have nothing ready. At all. And Jellicoe's looking at people and going, we've been telling you. And they're all going, it's the Admiralty's fault. The Admiralty are going, we've been telling you. You've said it's got to be the public works people to build them, and none of you have had the public works people building them. Okay. So what are we going to do? So, for most of 1914, what the Royal Navy is doing is the Grand Fleet is sailing up and down the west coast of England. Yeah. They're sailing up and down the west coast. Why? So they can go up and round Scotland if they need to stop the Germans getting out through the North Atlantic that way. Or they can go south to protect the channel if the Germans try to go that way, because they haven't yet got the channel barrier in place. So you can, and there's another thing. You cannot use Scapa Flow until you've got the channel barrier in place. Because whilst the High Seas Fleet could still theoretically force the channel, you can't leave the channel undefended. Once you've got the channel barrier, the minefields in place, and the various barrage, and you've got them backed up by the pre-dreadnoughts and HMS Dreadnought, then you can move your battle fleet up to Scapa Flow. But you can only do that once Scapa Flow is defended. And Scapa Flow is going to take a lot of work to make it defendable. It's going to take a lot of work. Graham Harlan. This right-hand man was not Alexander McCall. His real name was Alexander MacDonald. You don't say, Graham. Now, if I told you the three names that go through my family are Alexander, Douglas, and Donald, going all the way back, and I said that our surname going a long way back was Govan Hewitt Clarke, for the region in Scotland we came from in that particular family, and the Donald and Alexander and Douglas and Donald also comes from the Jacobs side as well as the Clarke side. You might have an idea where my family comes from, where my family loyalties, although we did have a rule of if you don't pay, we don't fight you. You pay or we don't fight you. And I should have also added, please, I forgot this, that some of the money which was supposed to be sent to the Scots as part of the deal with Harkin the Fourth Harkinson's son might have disappeared en route. We may have filtered. But don't worry, the Scottish made up for it to make sure that the Norwegians did get the full amount. And we spent the money on things pretty. I think we might have built a small castle with it. There is one that goes up in our area about that time. I go full Ulster accent on Scottish. Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, for Jerome, getting called the Scapa Flow should be its own book. I think it is its own book, but I think it's, if I remember correctly, the publishers of it are Routledge, and the book is about £200. And that was new, let alone now what it is now. West Coast, that explains the nations, right? Yep. It doesn't, a long way from Scarborough. As usual, honestly, no pay, no fighting is good advice. Yeah, my family were good at that one. Basically, you had to pay us, and but we also didn't care who paid us. We didn't switch sides inside a battle, but we did switch sides between a battle over a 3-day period. One side paid us for the first battle. Then they stopped paying us, and the other side decided to pay us. We turned up and fought for them in the next battle. And it was a case of, you're traitors to us! And we're going, you didn't pay us! So we kill you! Incar, find it hard to comprehend how the Grand Fleet was viciently served in Scapa with lack of interest during World War I. Well, I'll explain as we go on. But basically, the decision is, once you've got the channel barrage where it is, and you've got the channel blocked off, Scapa Flow makes the best sense to have the base. Because if the Germans are heading out, or up, and they have to head out, you can head down. If you look at this base, instead of you having to head out an angle, you can literally come out and head down. So you're sort of a case of, well, actually, if I angle it right. So this is the Royal Navy, and this is the German Navy. The German Navy are trying to get that way to attack the British. And the Royal Navy is coming down on them. So the whole point is, the Germans go in, turn around and go, hello, we bumped into the Royal Navy. You're between us before we get home. Bye-bye. Crush. Then the German fleet sunk. Royal Navy goes rearms. Whatever's left and able goes out. Forces its way probably through Denmark Straits, while another bit goes and shouts at the Kiel Canal. Goes south. sits on off the Baltic coast of Germany and goes, "What are you going to do about us?" It's a lovely idea in theory. In practice, it needs a little bit of work, and will need a lot of destroyers to survive the campaign in order to provide protection from the submarines, minefields, and various other things they're likely to run into. But that is what one has the Harwich Force for. That's one. So someone refused to pay your ransom, they'd be left alone. No, we did understand the pillaging thing, but what we do is we go and find someone else to pay us to pillage it, so we get double paid. You're mistaken. If you just pillage as your income, that is not enough income. Who knows what you're going to find? Whereas if you're pillaged but also being promised lands and gold, then you're guaranteed some money, guaranteed some long-term profit, and you get a bonus. Pillaging is bonus. Pay keeps the wolf from the door. No pay, no fighty, but he might pay and then he fighty. It works. Wrong gosh, I now have an image of Dr. Clarke going full Bridgel in Train Spotting. Graham, Londoners, never trust them, they're all about money. Well, to be fair, technically. Yeah. Govan is technically is Glasgow, and is technically Lowlands, but my family is actually Highlanders. We spent most of our time in the Highlanders and in that area. But Govan is where we set up. It's going to sound strange. We used Govan as the place to sell stuff. It was a nice, good place to sell stuff. So we would sell whatever we pillaged in Govan. No questions asked. Our Stoner will not be coming back for it. No, we're not pirates, we're privateers. It worked. Yeah. Declan, I know, but Dr. Z Jelgo has to factor something else into account in the meeting. Yeah, that is sort of. So here's the actual sort of base structure. And it worked. It's Govan. I mean, it's not really Glasgow, it's Govan. Yeah, it's Govan. Govan is a whole different place, really, in some respects. Scapa was, and I cannot overemphasize this more, Scapa was a forward operating base. And it makes sense. You have a very limited golf course, which even Jellicoe would have to do at a run to make it fair for other people. You had interesting communications with home. You had interesting infrastructure, which you pretty much had to build. And yeah, it's interesting times, let's say. John South. Because I see why so many people left Europe. Look, my family did leave Europe quite heavily. Yeah, you'll find us you'll find branches of my family in Canada, America, Australia, South Africa, India. We're pretty much all over the world. Honestly, the whole point about, and I'm going to get this, well, I guess this makes against all odds, old history, where Scapa is a naval base likely heavily upgraded, as another ridiculous thing about the list. Yes, because look at this lovely area. Okay. There is very limited flat land for you to build a base on it, and it's going to be frigging cold the entire time. You're going to need to establish a hospital. You're going to need to establish all sorts of things there. And how are you getting supplies in? Are you going to have to bring all the supplies in by ships? Do you really want to have a supply centre that's dependent upon you bringing up convoys? And they would be huge convoys. There is a reason why when you type in floating dock Scapa flow, it brings up pictures of Invergordon. It brings up pictures of other places where they put the floating docks. Not that far away, but far enough away, they were safe and fine. So, it's a beautiful, picturesque place to go, and it's also one of those places which more normally you associate with things like cathedrals and castles, where you can literally feel, and battlefields, you can feel the weight of history there. But yeah, it's got an atmosphere. And when you think about World War II, when they're putting air defences all around and all sorts of things, the sheer effort to supply it, okay? We talk about supplying Malta. We talk about supplying all the difficulties of supplying the Far East. People often forget the difficulties of supplying Scapa. It was important in World War II for bottling up the Germans in the North Sea, and attempting to, and supporting the Arctic convoys. Now, it would have been far more important and far more useful in World War II if we hadn't lost Norway, of course. That's kind of the hole in the plan. But, honestly, the thing is, from basically 1920 to 1940, we forget about Scapa flow. It falls into disrepair. It's all sorts of things. It's mistreated. It is basically a coaling station and a fueling station. You can get more shells there, but if you need to do a lot of ships quickly, you send them to other places, which is what happened after Jutland. Think about it. Think about the stories of where the ships turn up. How many of them end up going back into Scapa flow, and how many of them are sent off in squadrons to different bases to rearm, because that's where the railway line goes to, and they can actually supply enough shells to actually get them rearmed and out to sea. So Scapa flow has a lot of space in it, and it's very useful for getting an entire fleet anchored together. There aren't many spaces where you're going to have the space to get the entire ground fleet sitting together. And the fact that it has space for the entire high seas fleet and still has space to spare shows how massive it is and how suitable it is as an anchorage, which is another reason why it's very useful. But if you don't have a fleet the size of the Grand Fleet, you don't really need to use it. They did build a hospital there. They did. But the thing is, they built the hospital, and I mentioned the hospital. There are all sorts of things you need to build and get it to work, but it's supplying those things. Supplying a hospital is not just a job of setting up a hospital. And G.D. Hum, Lord Kitchener had lunch with Jellicoe and Scapa flow the last day of his life. Yes, I'm not sure who was more disappointed, Lord Kitchener in the lunch or Jellicoe in the conversation. It's keeping it supplied. There are letters in the National Archives going backwards and forwards from the hospital about needing supplies sent up. And it's a constant. Every time you get supplies of something, one thing, you're there running short of something else. And it's always getting it sent up and getting it there. Yeah, all those buildings in Scapa, why people think the island was burning anthracite. They bought a bunch of it for shore installations. Yeah, they needed a lot more coal. A lot more coal to keep it warm. And again, I will say this, diving is beautiful in Scapa Flow, but it is not something you do, A, unless you're experienced, and B, without a proper team. Okay? Do not go up there on your own and just think, I'm going to go for a dive. Because I had a friend who's quite good at diving. When I say quite good, Royal Navy Reserves dive team. You know, the people who the mine warfare specialists who go and actually are supposed to swim up to the mines. So really very, very good at diving. Took himself up to Scapa Flow on a holiday. Had all his kit with him. Decided to walk down the beach and just go off the beach. Thankfully, a couple of hours later, there happened to be a very nice fisherman who helped him get out onto his boat and get him back. It is very cold, very strong currents underwater, and it is full of very interesting nooks and crevices which will take you in. Go with a proper team. That's good. The Royal Logistics Corps would be having a wonderful feeling with Schadenfreude, watching the Royal Naval Logistics try to keep it supplied. Yeah, they would have been. However, the Royal Navy commandeered the Royal Logistics Corps' trains and steam engines for the purpose. So actually, they were having the job passed on to them as well. They were a little bit unhappy about that. Graham, no, please don't, unless you're a competent as we spent 12 hours looking for the last one. Yeah. So please don't. If you're going to go diving, go with a team. If you're going to go walking in the mountains, go with a team. Never go in less than a pair, and preferably do a buddy system. Have more than a pair. Right. The life of the Grand Fleet was cold. Okay? Very, very cold. I cannot emphasize enough, there is not much to do in the Orkneys. There is not much chauffeur life. There were not many pubs. You weren't allowed ashore that often. And there's not much to do. You basically had a life of maintenance, as in the normal painting, cleaning of your ships, firing, drill, gunnery practice, and exercise, and sleep, and repeat every single day. Which is why the Grand Fleet gets as quite as skilled and gets as capable as it is, because unlike the German fleet, which is in Wilhelmshaven, which means they have to sail out to do these things and sail back, and their crews want, of course, to go ashore and have fun with the culture, etc., in Wilhelmshaven and all the other things. There is nothing for the Royal Navy's crews to go ashore and have fun with. There is literally nothing. It is not a good place. There is not a lot for them to do, so they stay on ship. It's kind of like when I run a boarding school in the middle of the country, and I'm running it for a revision course, and the rules are pretty clear. We can't allow anyone but A-level students out, and that's only if there is somewhere within easy walking distance that we actually don't think is going to be bad for them to go to in the evening. And therefore, if you're in the middle of the countryside, and I turn around to you and go, well, you haven't got a car with you, and the nearest pub is 40 minutes walk down dark alleys and winding country lanes in the dark, which aren't lit. Amazingly, no one wants to go out anywhere. No one. Can't think why. They tend to prefer to stay, with me organising evening activities of pizza and rock climbing or swimming or various other things. And they love that. And that's a lot of fun. You always get one who goes, oh no, I want to go out. And you go, really? And usually they leave. And about 10 minutes later, you get a phone call on the centre phone, which is basically, Alex, yeah, I have no idea where I am. Can you come pick me up? Do you have your phone? Yes. Put your phone on torchlight mode so I can see where you are in the lane. They're usually not that far down the lane. Schadenfreude then comes in when I resist the urge to tell them I told you so. This is the point. The Grand Fleet becomes a very well-honed instrument of war and manages to become the capability and skills that they have, and they are, because they are miles away from anywhere where they could actually be anything, are they not? Oh, thank you, Paul from Chicago. Webcams chat has been having fun this evening. Thank you. You got you busted them quickly. And it really does have an impact on the performance. And one of the things it also has is the political involvement of the Royal Navy. Because let's be honest, where you would think sailors who have got periods of inactivity are often ripe for political infiltration and picking up radical ideas. And in the nicest way, the Royal Navy, that really doesn't happen. Why? Because they're so busy and so bored and disconnected from everything. Whereas their German counterparts and their Russian counterparts all have those same issues. Then Hopes. Turtle and Theoretical Sisters sink several Iron ships during the War of Independence and successfully sink several more ships during the War of 1812. How does it affect Scapa sub-defense in World War II? World War I and World War II? Like, might actually exist in World War I to begin with? No, it's still going to be as strong. In a nice way, the defense in World War I aren't the problem. The defense in World War II are the problem. Consider it. The UK doesn't have mountains. It has some spiky hills. Don't tell that to some of the Highlanders. Do not tell that, Glenn. You'll get hurt. And I know. You grew up in the Rockies and climbed Snowdon. Snowdon is fun. You can climb Snowdon by accident. You can also go up by steam train. So I tend to prefer to climb up and go down by steam train. It actually, it does sound bad for morale, but actually it's actually quite good for morale because they get very confident in their ships. Some would say too confident in their ships sometimes, which possibly leads to some of the things in Jutland. But they get very confident in their ships. It is kind of like the Falkland Islands, which the British use for the same thing today. It's far enough away we can do all sorts of combined arms training and no one gets in the way. It's brilliant. Ambition. You got the hat and back, had sun and trained, but missed the nose. Hit shutter a minute seconds too early. Try again next week. Good luck. Duckling 95. What was the reaction from the Grand Fleet with the American battleship sun up? Mostly, well, boys, you need to do some gunnery practice, don't you? Well, no, we feel we're rather good at gunnery. Right then, let's do a quick gunnery competition between you and pick any battleship. Pick any one you want. Americans watch the British battleship and its gunnery and go, yeah, we'll start that practice right about now. Thank you. Okay, good. Carry on. By the time the Americans left, they had two abiding things. One, They knew the importance of good gunnery, and 2, that Beatty was an idiot. Both are good things to live by. Yeah, the gym in the Falklands is always surprisingly well equipped and very well maintained. It's almost as if most of the garrison lives there. Oh, God. Right. Vision. If memory serves, the RA individual ships did a lot to entertain personnel, like the first lieutenant commanders at Easter time, with lots of bars and lack of bars and whatever. They did their best to try and support and make sure that the crews were okay. But there are limits to what the British could get away with. They couldn't. Let's put it this way: the Royal Navy couldn't do the things which other navies might have done and might have been tempted to, because there is a very there are some certain very strong political movements in the UK, and frankly, the admirals have no desire to upset their wives that much. They did build seriously in World War II. Cinemas, squash courts, gyms, you name it. They had it in World War II. In World War II. In World War One, they didn't put in so much. Yeah, the Americans were happy with that. Anyway, so attempts to enter. In World War One, there were 2 attempts to enter. There were those carried out by U-18 and U-116. Now, this is not U-116. This is a picture of UB-148, because I don't have a picture of UB-116. So, U-18 is the first submarine to ever try getting into Scapa flow. And it has a very bad time, because she's laid down in October 1910, launched in April 1912, commissioned in November 1914, and scuttled/sunk in November 1914. She is commanded from October 1914 by Captain Lieutenant von Hennig. Now, on the 23rd of November 1914, U-18 penetrated the fleet anchorage of Scapa Flow via Hoxha Sound by following a steamer through the boom and entering the anchorage with little difficulty. However, the fleet wasn't there, as said. It was mostly on the west coast of Scotland and Ireland, dispersed those anchorages, because Scapa Flow wasn't yet finished with its defences. But there were guard boats there, and as U-18 tried to make her escape, the trawler, Dorothy Gray, altered course and rammed the periscope, rendering it unserviceable. U-18 then suffered a failure of her diving plane motor and became unable to maintain her depth. At one point, actually hit the seabed. She was rammed then a second time by the destroyer HMS Gary. Yes, Gary did do something helpful. There aren't many Garys who are that helpful in life. I'm joking, of course. We knew Mr. Caulfield. You're watching. And at which point, Captain Lieutenant von Hennig decides to surface, scuttle his command just outside Hoxha Gate. All crew members, barring one, are picked up by British boats, and 1 crew member perished, while the remaining 22 were interned as prisoners of war for the rest of the war. You can find the wreck 75 metres below the surface just outside Hoxha Gate, if you want to go and have a look at it. Okay. Great Gina Hum. What was the RN reaction to USS Washington's gunnery when it showed up at the Scapa Flow? They were pleasantly surprised. It was better when the it was pleasantly surprised. Graham, wasn't the Grand Fleet a majority down in Rosyth after BT took over? No, they still needed to hang out at Scapa Flow. Rosyth isn't big enough for the whole Grand Fleet to get in there, and moving it down there, BT might have wanted to move it down there because he likes the nightlife of Rosyth, etc. But honestly, most of the fleet wasn't down there, and often BT, when he was down there, wasn't with the fleet. Sim Richards, did the American ships run better on British coal? They did find the Welsh coal slightly better than some of their own coal, but remember the Americans had access to fairly good coal themselves. Hello, Good Game Landed. Graham, I got a picture of 116, or what's left of it. Right then. So, UB116. Well, this is a rather crueler story. She is launched in November 1917, commissioned in May 1918, and sunk by a remote-controlled mine on the 28th of October 1918. Now, like all of her counterparts, she carried 10 torpedoes, was armed with an 88mm deck gun, and would carry a crew of 3 officers and 31 men, with a cruising range of 7,420 nautical miles on the surface. Now, what happened to her is a testimony of why you shouldn't attack Scapa Flow at this point. Because in October 1918, she decided to make a foray into Scapa Flow. And she's detected by hydrophones. Now, in the age of modern remote-controlled warfare, we are told that the distance killing is going to have an effect on the human psyche, and this is something new. It's not new. What's new is the scale. What actually happened here was, like many other times in the past which have used this similar system, someone on land heard the hydrophones going and went, something's moving in that area. Right then, remote control mines. Bang, 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 bang. Oh, I appear to have sunk your submarine. The mines were triggered from the shore, and they killed all 36 aboard her. So yes, she is a war grave. Basically, the reason why you get ships moved down to Rosyth is because there is far more facilities for maintaining ships. And the trouble is, as the war service goes on, and this is the thing which BT takes advantage because he prefers Rosyth to Scapa Flow. As the war service goes on, you need more supporter ships. The ships get worn down. Remember, as I've been talking to you before, you need maintaining about how you need to refit and repair ships. Well, you need the maintenance facility to support the refit and repair. You need the infrastructure. Scapa doesn't have the infrastructure. It's a forward base. It's one of the interesting things is really the British do understand this. One of the reasons why they're building Singapore as much as they can, one of the reasons why people misunderstand Singapore's role, is because they look at Singapore and they go, oh, they're building a big base there. But that's not because Singapore is supposed to be the operations base. It's because it's supposed to be the logistics theatre base, which the ships can come back to and repair. So basically, if we think about it, in many ways, they weren't building a Scapa Flow with Singapore. They were building a Rosyth. They were building that sort of maintenance facility as far forward as they could. And there's a reason why they picked Singapore, because it's the most forward on the major logistics routes which already exist. So they've already got merchant ships and they know how to route them and they can get them going and supplying and supporting them. And if you're going to have a long-term war in the Far East, which is what they were thinking about war with Japan, that made sense. Schumacher, well, you can fit the entire Grand Fleet in there once. You just have great difficulty leaving. Yeah, that's the joy of a scythe. And yet U-47 succeeds. U-47 is World War II. We'll be getting onto that in a bit. Now, remember, as part of their defences of Scapa Flow, they did sink about 60 block ships. So they did a lot of things to try and defend it. They put in nets and booms, and minefields, artillery, concrete barriers, all sorts of things are put in the First World War. However, in the interning, do the interning. So why are the Germans based where the Germans are? So I've been over this before. The Royal Navy, where does the Royal Navy sit when they're up there? In the southwest corner. Where do the Royal Navy do their firing from? The northwest corner. What's roughly in between them? At the westerly point, almost. It's where they stuck the German fleet. So they have a legitimate reason for the Royal Navy to be on both sides of the fleet at any one time they want. To make the German position more difficult. It's always fun. General Wargrave Dock, they took the bodies off. They didn't get all the bodies from my research. Tobias Geoffrey, physical therapy and Dr. Clarke. Sure, why not? So, the interning is a political decision. It's also interesting as to where it happens, because honestly, the British want control of it. Mainly because they don't want other people getting the German fleet, because that would cause the British political trouble. One interesting thing about Scapa Flow is it's very difficult for people to get information there. It's very easy for the British to control access to information, because any information to get to the fleet has to first get to the islands, and then it has to get from the islands to the fleet. So you've got 2 points of control. And those 2 points of control have a bearing. Those 2 points of control have an influence. This means that they're getting very little information. They have no idea there's the time that things have been extended. Now, here is the scenario I want to lay you out. So the British are controlling access to information and basically denying it to the High Seas Fleet because they don't want them reacting to any of the news about how the High Seas Fleet is going to get divided up amongst the powers. They're worried about them scuttling the ships. Same point, they realise it's gone past the date which the last information the High Seas Fleet realised was the decision date, but no one has sort of passed on to the High Seas Fleet that there's been extension. One of the reasons for the extension is that there are various powers fighting over who's going to get what ships of the High Seas Fleet. Same point, the Royal Navy has to do a massive exercise, which means the vast, overwhelming majority of the Grand Fleet goes out to sea. Is not at Scapa Flow. They are well away from that. The Germans have managed for months to be, and I'm fairly certain the British have noticed this to an extent, doing various procedures to make their ships more sinkable. British don't have to be amazing to notice this. Right then. Report as pornography. Okay. Right then. Hello, Millennium 1640. This means that the commander draws the obvious reason from it. He's drawn the idea that, honestly, that the war could be going on, or war could be starting, there's problems going on, and he thinks the Allies are about to take his ships. He thinks they've gone out to sea, so that's his opportunity to sink his fleet. And that's what he does. For the British, this works out brilliantly, as it means no one gets to High Seas Fleet. And they get a load of salvage. So they get money. It's a win-win-win for the British. Now, do I think they planned it that way? I wouldn't put it past us. But there again, the fact is, the Germans are in turn there because everyone agrees it's the safest spot to put them. So everyone's agreed that's basically the only option. It also means that they're, because they are principally under the watchful eyes of the Royal Navy. So they've got the biggest and most baddest watchdog you could possibly have. Secondly, and here's the real problem when we start looking at it, it's the most logical place to put them as well, because it keeps them the furthest away from Germany that they could actually get to. But it does work out well for the British, because the big problem for the British with the High Seas Fleet would have been it getting into other powers' hands. Would have been it being used by another power, another navy. Because you might think about the naval treaties and all those things. Well, basically, if the Americans and French and the Italians had acquired German battleships, that would have meant the British would have, A, had to keep their older battleships in service for longer when they wanted to get rid of them and replace them with new ships, and B, would have automatically been in a naval race. Did anyone salvage High Seas Fleet armor plates get used on warships? Nope. Mainly because they'd been sunk, but also because that wasn't that good. So anyway, all this sounds incredibly convenient. There are lots of cognizants that just happen to lead the Germans aside in scuttle. Yes. What sort of more sinkable work? Well, they had welded open what's they called? Bulkhead doors. They had got rid of valves, got rid of all sorts of things which you need to close to sort the water getting out. Basically, they'd taken their ships apart and made them as sinkable as possible. So they could literally just sink down. And they did their work well. Back in a second. Someone just knocked on my door. Hello, what do you want? Oh, thank you. Oh, you need the help. Sorry, sister was being an idiot and trying to move a pot. Ay, caramba. I love her dearly, but oh my lord. I don't know. Anyway. So this is another map of Scapa flow from that period, and you can see outlined clearly the fleet anchorage. You can also see the anchorage for ships exercising and torpedo range. You can also see roughly where the Germans are positioned. There's also the Royal Fleet Auxiliary anchorage, where they're put in. and the various things which are put together. The interwar years are years of neglect. Occasionally they're used for an exercise, but honestly, really, there isn't much going on there. And there isn't much support for anything going on there. Which is not unusual. Let's be honest. If you want to get money out of the British Treasury, you basically either need a gun to their head or a very compelling reason. How much of the disgruntlement in the crews of the High Seas fleet was over the food? I suspected it would overwhelming fishing and potatoes given Scapa's location. They weren't that happy, but you know, they were okay. They were. Let's put it this way: the food wasn't that bad. Nine Phillips, what in your opinion would be most likely division in the High Seas Fleet if it hadn't scuttled? Well, in the nicest way, the French would have wanted to replace all their pre-dreadnoughts with German dreadnoughts. The Italians wanted some as their compensation. The Americans wanted some. It would probably have ended up being... I wouldn't be surprised if you'd end up with roughly about a quarter of the ships going to... Well, the ships being divided into roughly 5 equal parts. And going to the Royal Navy, the US Navy, the French Navy, the Italian Navy. The Royal Navy really didn't want that. And especially they didn't want... They're most worried about the division of the submarines, but also the dreadnoughts. All those things could have been a game changer. Especially once they got to look at the American dreadnoughts and they got to look at the French ships, which World War I did allow them to get a far better look at. They realized that the American ones had very good points and were in some ways better than the German ships. But the German ships were better in other ways than the Americans, and that would have helped the Americans get better in certain areas, which could have been a threat. Same with the French, same with the Italians. You have to remember, it's never a case of one side is massively better, overwhelmingly better, and one side's overwhelmingly less good. Usually, it's a case of one side's better in one area, one side's better in another area. And once you're dealing with some of the complexity of ship design, that's often the thing. So, the information in a ship, the things that you might learn from it, might compensate in the areas you're less capable in, and enables you to produce a better ship overall. And plus, there'd be the balance of numbers. They also knew it would be quite difficult to keep them going, but that's why they did it themselves. Many 1740. So basically, take all the damage control systems, disable them. Watertight doors? We've installed a safety device to prevent them from swinging shut should the ship take a list. Pretty much, they sealed them. Sure. I imagine they had a telephone line. Not that the Germans were allowed to use, and really the telephone line had issues. It kept being broken in storms. So that's Jeffrey. I'm hearing what the rest of the Allies wanted was a naval operation paperclipped after the First World War. Yep. Amazingly, it's going to sound strange, but the thing I also find, and this is the thing I find really interesting about it, is of the ships saved, the ones the British had said they would like in any treaty, Baden, Emden, Nuremberg, Frankfurt, and 18 of the destroyers were saved. So the ships which actually survived were the ones the British wanted. Hmm. So, Johnson, did you ever see the Battleships mini-doc series from the 90s where they had an L lady who was in primary school and did a school trip to Scapa, but they were there when the Germans scuttled? Hmm. That's sure. No, I mean, the telephone line is there for the communication between our commanders there in the Amity. Yeah, in theory. In practice, it had a habit of going down. The island had its own local exchange, which worked quite well for the local communications, but sometimes the communications with the mainland would have to be relayed regularly. What's the Russians' answer to Scapa Flow, and how would you rate it against Scapa Flow? Russia doesn't really have an answer to Scapa Flow. They don't have an equivalent forward base. That's the problem. Another secret, how precisely did those particular ships survive? Amazingly, British crews managed to get aboard them quickly enough to prevent them sinking. It's amazing skill. Inca, UK put more effort into saving ships that were technically interesting to them. Yeah, they put a lot of effort. There's also a few German sailors who got shot during the sinking. They were the last casualties of World War One. Depending on how you, of course, draw the end of World War One, whether you include the whole issue in the Russian Civil War, etc., as part of World War One. Hardline communications were more difficult to intercept than radio ones, but again, hardline communications have to be laid. And it's one of the issues. They do set them up, and they do set up a telegram cable and all sorts of things, but it's actually making sure they work and keeping them working. And when they laid it originally, they laid it rather quickly. And that one, they had issues with communication. Let's put it this way. Scapa Flow is notorious for its information inconsistencies. In World War One. By World War Two, they've got better. By World War Two, they've got better. So, World War Two begins, and I would like you to point us to this map. This is World War Two, what Scapa Flow had by 1941. Not in 1939. Okay? In 1941, it has all of these defences. In 1939, it has, well, in the interwar years, most of the Scapa Flow's defences have destroyed themselves. Most of the block ships have gone decrepit and fallen apart, been moved because they're damaged. Most of the things which were set up in World War One, and if we go back to the World War One defences, which you can sort of see here, they're built in World War One. They're quite good for World War One, but by World War Two, well, they are putting in a lot of equipment to defend it after it's happened. And they're putting all that equipment in because it wasn't there when it began. And so, honestly, and Gunther, I think, is it Gunther? Let me just check, because I keep getting his name wrong. Karl Barnes, of course, decides the operation. Mr. Prince, come on, what's your first name? It's not Gunther. Why do I keep calling him Gunther today? Prian. First name, please. Brain. I'll find it in my notes. Gunther Prien. Yeah, it was Gunther Prien. Gunther Prien, when he comes in, basically comes into an open harbour and goes, woohoo! Happy days. Because in the interwar years, Scapa had been forgotten. It had been deserted. If you, in the nicest way, you can sort of see reason why. If you're talking in the 1920s and early 1930s, major war is likely to be the Far East. So you expect them to be focusing their defensive building on the Far East. They don't, of course. They don't. We know they don't. So, you know, basically the Treasury is just saving money. Indeed, does mean such a shame the additional RN crew in the area found the mooring lines on launches knotted too tightly to free and were unable to reach the others. Hmm. John Cameron, did the UK not have a tap on the German telegraph lines to the US and South America at the beginning of World War I? Yes, but that's because we mostly laid the cables. We knew exactly where they were. Lion-top, what happened to the North Sea mine barrage put down by the US? Did they just rip it out by the time of World War II? Honestly, most of it had disappeared by the time of World War II, either been recovered or had gone off in storms. They're putting it all in there because it wasn't there on the 14th of October 1939. No. Good for Brian. I know. Ian Carr. Kirtland Firth. The stretch of water between Orkney and the mainland of Scotland is wild with some strong currents. Yeah, it's fun times. Well, they're focusing on the Far East, but they're not actually spending money in the Far East, and they're not spending money locally, so they're not spending money anywhere. Just, it's pointless. They are pointless. Anyway, so, let's talk about the loss of Royal Oak. So, first of all, I want to get into Royal Oak, because the amount of people go, well, it's just an R-class, so the RN didn't need to worry about losing an R-class. Well, they do. It's the first capital ship they lose in World War II, but also it's one of the most important capital ships in the Royal Navy in 1939. Why is it important? Well, because the Royal Navy has upgraded of its World War I vintage ships and have had 1930s recent upgrades. Renown, Warspite, Queen Elizabeth, Valiant, Royal Oak. Let me put that again. Renown, Warspite, Queen Elizabeth, Valiant, Royal Oak. Royal Oak is one of 5 capital ships which have been upgraded. Chosen because of the R-class, she was probably the one in the best nick and best condition. This is an upgraded and improved R-class. This is one of the upgraded ships. And every time you lose a capital ship, you put more strain on the existing capital ships. Yes, the Royal Navy has the King George V coming into service. Yes, they're going to do a lot of work. Yes, they're going to be useful. But in the nicest way. And I say this with love in my soul. Every single capital ship you lose has an effect on the others. It means when you can you send them into maintenance? Can you send them into repair, refit? Do you have one available for other operations? Do you not do something because you don't have one available? And this is the modernized, upgraded R-class. So it would have been very useful to have. It would have been a force multiplier for the Mediterranean. It would have been a force multiplier for many other operations where having an extra 8 15-inch guns in a fairly usable hull would have been useful to have along. No, it's not massively fast, but it's useful. And as Melanie 1640 points out, all the crew aboard were freaking important too. Yes, they are. They're well-trained service personnel. It's like with other carriers that lose. Every time you lose one of the pre-war ships early in the war, you lose a lot of experience in one go. Because that's all those crews were entirely pre-war service personnel. They aren't new war hires. They're long-term experienced personnel who you need. And as Ian Carl pointed out, the Queen Elizabeth and Valiant are still being rebuilt. But they're 2 of the 5. So, the main upgrades to Royal Oak, and it's worthwhile considering her main upgrades. So, she'd had an interesting career, and she'd actually experienced a mutiny in her past. Details of her upgrades. Not really much details of that. Major alterations. She's extensively rebuilt between 1922 and 1924, and her final refit is 1934 to 36. Her deck armor was increased to 5 inches over the magazines and 3.5 inches over the engine rooms. In addition to modernization of the ship's systems, she has anti-aircraft defenses strengthened by replacing all the single mounts of the air guns with twin 4-inch guns, adding a pair of octuple 2-pounder Mark 8 pom-pom guns, pair of octuple, that is, at breast to funnel, and pom-pom anti-aircraft directors were added on new platforms abreast and below fire control director in the spotting top. She had a high-angle control system Mark III director, replacing the Mark I in the spotting top, and another replaced torpedo director aft. A pair of quadruple mounts for Vickers 0.5-inch machine guns were added. The main mast was reconstructed as a tripod to support the weight of radio direction and finding, and a second high-angle control station. The forward pair of submerged torpedo tubes were removed, and 4 experimental 21-inch torpedo tubes were added above water forward of A turret. This is some of the most extensive reworking, and definitely the most extensive reworking of any R-class ship. She's still not going to be massively fast, she's still got a top speed of 22 knots, but she's a lot more useful than her other sisters would have been. Fury Kitten. I wanted. There's part of me which thinks I should tell you off for that one, but there's also part of me which laughs at that, so I'm leaving that on one side. So honestly, this is a ship which you do not want to lose. And she's sitting in Scapa flow because with a speed of 22 knots and her upgrades, she's considered a fairly good, useful tool for blocking. I.e., she can back up other ships. So let's say Warspite or one of the Queen Elizabeths managed to pounce on Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. Well, they could do the damage, and if they slowed them down enough, this is what would come in to back them up. The R-class through most of World War II are not really what you want as first-rate battleships. But Royal Oak comes the closest to being one because of her upgrades. And certainly in air defense would have been a very useful asset to have in the Mediterranean. She has a lot of fire control and a lot of air defense. But again, probably the biggest crew loss on Royal Oak would have been the experienced NCOs, especially a lot of those World War I veterans. You need experienced NCOs to build up a wartime force. Yes, but they also lost an admiral. Never good to lose one of those. We try not to lose them too often. Henry Balgrove, the Blagrove, the the commander of 2nd Battle Squadron, a former veteran of HMS Tiger. He was, he'd commanded Curacao, Norfolk, Sussex. He'd fought at Battle of Doggerbank and Battle of Jutland. And he's sunk in Royal Oak. He's described in 1927 as above average, exceptionally good officer, which has caused me to recommend him strongly for promotion. Very good powers of leadership, exerts an excellent influence, is tactful and easy to deal with, cheerful, energetic, and frank personality. Physically fit, plays and is interested in all games, has been a rugged player of high order and understands the game, socially popular, much liked in the mess, has extraordinary energy and organising capacity, and a brain capacity above average. Recommended for further employment in a more responsible position. He was a good officer, and he was a loss. It's one of the other senior officers the Royal Navy loses at the beginning of World War II, which causes trouble. And as Ian Carr points out, the Isles were originally scheduled to be replaced by the King George V. Royal Oak would have been the last to go. And as Graham Hanlon points out, one of the reasons for her being over the side where she was to provide air defence for the fleet. The two knots were supposed to. Well, let's be honest. If the Revengers had been built to the same had been built as originally planned with coal fire, they probably wouldn't have been. They would probably been about the same speed as other battleships at the time. Whilst they were upgraded to being oil fired and not oil powered, within their costs, they came in at 22 knots rather than 21 knots, and they couldn't match a Queen Elizabeth class. But really, ideally, you should have both sets should have been about 28 knots. Shoma, can you imagine if Royal Oak was available for pedestal or close cover in PQ-17? She would have been useful. And in PQ-17, again, that's the perfect example of if you'd had an R-Class free and you worry about them, if you'd had a battleship sitting along there, she would have been useful to have along there. And in nicest way, yeah, Bismarck or Tirpitz versus her, well, yeah, you're probably going to say Tirpitz is probably going to win. But the thing is, the sheer amount of damage he's probably going to do in Tirpitz in return means that Tirpitz ain't going to get home. And that is not what Tirpitz is out for. Again, you have to remember what's your enemy metrics. Did the Germans want a damaged battleship which ain't going to get home? No. Many students, socially popular is a consideration in promotion of flag ranks. Being able to support things in the mess and keep things organised and be popular with the officers and the crew is considered. You have to be a personable leader. Were all the crew on their bunks and hammocks at the time of their attack? Pretty much most were. Now, here is my big problem with the attack, and this is what happens. So, they sneak in. They sneak in, which is fine. They get through the block ships which have managed to be sunk and damaged, left over mostly from World War I. And they potter in, they thread through them. They enter the harbour at 0:27 hours on 14th October. And they start wandering around. The anchorage appears to be almost empty because Forbes had ordered to disperse the fleet and had removed the biggest targets away from there to get them to safety. However, he'd left the Belfast, which they didn't see, and the Royal Oak, and the Pegasus, but the Pegasus, of course, is World War I seaplane tender. And Prian actually thinks that Royal Oak is HMS Repulse. Which I think Repulse might have been going, really? And Royal Oak would certainly be going, really? One were going, I'm a battle cruiser. The other one going, I'm a battleship. Anyway, about 2 minutes to 1 in the morning, U-47 fires a salvo of 3 torpedoes from its bow tubes and a 4th lodged in its tube. A single torpedo struck the bow at 0104, shaking the ship and waking the crew. However, there was little visible damage. The starboard anchor chain had been severed, clattering noisily through its slips, and it was suspected that there had been an explosion in the ship's forward inflammable store, rather than anything else. They were mindful that the explosion had, an unexplained explosion, had destroyed Vanguard in Scapa Flow 1917, and so the announcement was made to check the magazine temperatures, and many sailors returned to their hammocks, unaware they were under attack. Literally, they just didn't believe they were under attack. This is overconfidence. Prion, realizing he wasn't being stalked and no one was after him, turned his submarine, shot from his stern torpedo. That missed. So reloaded his bow torpedoes, doubled back, and fired another salvo of 3 torpedoes, all at Royal Oak. And so at 0116 hours, all 3 strike the battleship and in succession midships and detonated. They blew holes in the armoured deck, destroying the stokers, buoys, marines' messes, and loss of electrical power. Cordite from the magazine ignited, and the ensuing fireball pretty much cleared out the rest of the ship's internal spaces. She listed to 15 degrees, and that's sufficient to push the open starboard side portholes below the waterline, rolls over on the side to 45 degrees, hanging there for several minutes, and then disappeared beneath the surface at 0129, 13 minutes after Prion's second strike. 835 men died with the ship or later from their wounds. They'd include, of course, the Rear Admiral, and 144 of the dead were boy seamen. That is, people under the age of 18, and was the largest ever such loss of a single Royal Navy action. That was what was lost. Now here is the thing. The nicest way. Why in the frickin' hell a frigating helicopter was there not, I don't know, sloops wandering around? This is the thing. This is the Royal Navy. You can build as many sloops as you like under the treaty system. This is one of the big problems I have with the treaty system. The treaty doesn't actually limit the number of sloops you build. You can build as many as you like. The Royal Navy still doesn't get to build enough. Doesn't campaign for. Henderson, various others trying to campaign for more, but they don't get the funding. And they also don't get support of wider Navy. And you need them. You also should have had defences. If you're going to use this place in wartime, it needs to be defended. You know, in the First World War, a trawler ramming in stops one of these submarine attacks. A trawler. You could have had some trawlers wandering around. There are lots of things. If you are going to leave these ships sitting in harbour as literal sitting ducks, there's a war, nice large explosion, let's go back to sleep. Yeah, this is that's the point I always find the strangest. Honestly, I'd have gone for there's an explosion. What can they? Let's get everyone to safe spots. So, what would have Oak's chances been if they had raised the ship and made for 8 knots just to be careful? It's how quickly could you get the ship started up? Honestly, between the attacks, we're talking a quarter of an hour. Could you get the ship moving in a quarter of an hour? Probably, but not by much. But that could be enough to throw it off. What would be more sensible is if you'd had a patrol ship go out and start hunting for things. Gosh, probably could have carried out the attack on the surface with a deck gun by the sound of it. That actually would have probably caused a different reaction, but yes. This is just... It's a well-planned attack. The Germans have lots of information to plan it. The Germans have been looking at Scapa Flow for a long, long time. But it shouldn't have happened. It should not have happened. It's just... Her crew nominally is 909, of which 835 died. So, theoretically, you have a little over 70 survivors. I think roughly 80, from memory. Right, Cash, you can get moving in 15 minutes. Well, as Stafford's pointed out, I don't think it'll be a completely cold start, as there's nowhere for them to plug in for electricity, etc. So they have to keep some things going to generate to provide them with power. And she's an oil-fired ship, so she doesn't take as long to get up to steam as a coal-fired ship, and again, not full speed. I'm just talking, well, Stafford mentioned 8 knots, but even 4 or 5 knots would be enough to move her a bit. And you'd also expect them to have closed down the portholes. Well, again, if I'm hit, the first thing I order is watertight all doors. And if they'd watertighted the doors, she might not have sunk. Because if you think about it, yes, there are huge damage from the messes and the fires, etc. But if the portholes are closed and you've got all the bulkheads, you might well be able to get her ashore. Nice agreement. 399 survived sinking. Yes, but 835 died from the sinking and wounds. So of those who survived sinking, not all of them lived. No, Rolls of Royal Oak, another Churchill bungle. I don't think you can blame that on Berta Churchill. Honestly, you can't, because yes, he's first Sea Lord by this point, but only just, and in the nicest way. It's been the defences in Scapa Flow have been let to go for the last 20 years. So pretty much every politician and every admiral who hadn't resigned over it, and everyone who hadn't, really pushed it, could be said to be at fault. Everyone knew the quality of defences in Scapa Flow were going down. No one really thought about it because no one really took the idea of war in Europe seriously until about 1936. At which point, someone should have done something about it. It would have been the sensible period to have done something about Scapa Flow in the 1936-37. To have just done some quiet upgrading of the fences. It wouldn't have cost much to go, yeah, we'll just put in a few things to make it a little bit safer from submarine entry and those sort of things. So the remainder of World War II, well, as you can see from this point, the defences go up rather quite well. So they get used, and she does get used a lot. This is Wasp, Washington, Wichita, Victorious, and I reckon probably Duke of York. But we're not quite sure. I don't think it's George V, because George V at this point was actually split, when this picture roughly seems to be taken, was then involved in splitting HMS Punjabi in half and was getting her bow checked. So I think if it's any of the George V class, it's probably Duke of York. But not 100% sure. And it's a nice outline. It's also a very scary group, and this is a key point of defending the Arctic convoys. But it's also a reminder of the sheer amount of force which had to be kept in the UK to defend the convoys against the outcoming of maybe just one German battleship. I.e., Tirpitz goes out to sea. Hello, we're here. You have to have overwhelming force if you're going to protect the Arctic convoys. Lined up. So the assault, that basic standing plan was not in place to protect. How did the subs sneak past blocks and nets unprotected? There weren't blocks. There weren't nets. That's the thing. They hadn't yet fully implemented them and got them in place. That's one reason why Forbes had asked for permission and got permission to disperse the fleet, because he didn't consider Scapa Flow to be safe. It's kind of like Jellicoe at the beginning of World War I. Scapa Flow's not safe. I'm not putting the fleet there. Forbes has less political power than Jellicoe does, so he's still got the fleet there. But it's not really a safe place to have the fleet, because all the defences have fallen apart. The blocking ships which we're relying on, they know, have fallen apart, literally. You know, Gunther Prinz goes over places which had theoretically had blocking ships, which no longer had blocking ships because they'd either been cleared by storms, collapsed themselves, or actually been removed by the Royal Navy as hazards to navigation. I'm avoiding that one, Shormack. It's not that wars were illegal. It's the wars where the war to end all wars had been fought in World War One. There was going to be no more major war between European powers. War would only be the practice of the uncivilized. Yeah. And I'm the Queen of Sheba. Would have been my great-grandfather's response. Probably would have been mine as well at the time. In car, old World War I battleship, HMS Heinrich, previously converted as a gunnery training ship, was shortly bombed in Scapa Flow, near miss, damaged and beached an AA ship for the remainder of the war. Go, Lando. Was Scapa ever under threat of Nazi bombers from Norway? They often tried to get that, and they sometimes did. So Clarke, that's a normal crew. Aren't the crews normally increased during war? See reference to 1,234 were aboard her that evening. There are debates of how many were aboard her. Theoretically, she should have had her crew increased. Theoretically, she should have had her crew increased. But also, some of the figures don't add up. And it's early wartime, and I think some of the crew that was assigned her weren't actually aboard her. But I could be wrong. Honestly, it's one of those things where there are lots of things I've read in a lot of detail and covered in a lot of detail. Sinking of the Royal Oak and the crew reasons about it is not something I have actually gone into a massive amount of detail on. So I'm going from my notes, which I've got from mostly from the person I inherited the course that I was teaching when I was talking about it from. Magister Millicent per Oxidants. Hello. If the Crown and Canada had stronger, closer ties before the wars, think all the ships we could keep safe in Great Lakes. Good luck sneaking all the way down the St. Lawrence. In World War II, more infrastructure building known as HMS Proserpine, nicknamed Proper Swine by the opposed to that. Yes, they did need to do a massive amount of infrastructure to support them, especially once you had the Americans there. The Americans like infrastructure. Schumacher, no, the Pact of Paris. Oh, God, Lord. We're not getting into the Pact of Paris. Ugh. Yeah, the block ship due to close the entry point used by Priam was in place very shortly after attack, typically late again. Yeah, pretty much they suddenly got access to some block ships after the attack. Does the Manchester Militum Peroxidants? Does the Royal Navy still use Scapa flow? They occasionally wander through there, but it's not used as a forward operating base anymore at the moment. So the remainder of World War II is pretty much key operating base for the Arctic convoys. It's a great forward place to bring these aircraft carriers and ships in. And basically, they're in the area of operations. They can be refueled and resupplied in relative calm and safety. And then you can carry them on. Shemek, just because it was stupid doesn't mean it didn't happen. No, it does mean it did happen. I know it happened. There are various things which happened which frankly are absurd. So, World War II is over. Why did we hang around there till 1958? Well, mostly it's because of these beauties! And other things built by our Soviet comrades, our former World War II partners, who, well, being a bit problematic. But the trouble is, the fleet continues to shrink in size, the complexity of infrastructure they require to support them continues to grow, the operating ranges are modified, and the world changes. And Scapa flow becomes more and more difficult to justify and support. However, what do we have happening to this day? Well, to this day, we have a lot of things going on there in terms of energy supplies. It's a critical space for ships to carry out transfer of liquefied natural gas and oil from ship to ship. It's got one of those special terminals, which exist in certain places in the world, where you can literally get tankers, go up each side of the terminal, and pass fuel between them. They are very useful for when you're having to offload from small tankers to bigger tankers, and from bigger tankers to small tankers, which is more often the way. Because more often you have ports which require fuel to be brought to them, which cannot take the size of huge tanker that you'd like to take them. So instead of what happens is the huge tanker goes to a place like Scapa flow, it moors up, and then the smaller tankers come up and go, fill me up! They fill up, and they go off to the ports to drop off the fuel. And so then the big tanker goes back to where it came from. Honestly, and I will do this again because it worked quite well last time. Hello. Right, let's make this bigger so you all can see it. And I can talk you through a bit. There, I'll do that. That's better, probably. So, for starters, we're going to the satellite layer. Now, those of you who want to say, okay, we should be building a big bridge. Right then, so where are you building the bridge from? You're going to build it from John O'Groats? And if you're going to build it, well, let's look at the roads you've got leading up to there. That doesn't look exactly like a major road, does it, the A9? This is the A9. It's a lovely place, and I've driven it, it's beautiful, but not exactly what we call a big major road. So let's look at the other major road going up there. That which goes to Wick. We'll want to sort of layers. Traffic and public transport. So, The A9 is the really big road. And that's a lovely road, but then we've got the coastal road going around. Oh, well, let's see what that's like. That's the A836. Now, I've driven this road. Anyone want to take a lot of lorries along this road? Anyone? Hello, tractor. The point is, if you wanted to put in infrastructure to support Scapa flow and turn it into a major base again, you would not only need to build infrastructure on all of this, and it would be a lot of infrastructure you'd have to build up. You probably have to build a bridge across this area, because that's the narrowest point, from Berwick to Huna or Jonagrots. And then you'd have to build some serious infrastructure all the way down here. Yeah. Because if we consider the major road, again, is the A9. And let's go look at this point in the A9. So this is one of the points where it's at its fattest. Here you go. Here is the A9. Again. Yeah. It's absolutely beautiful to drive along. I have to say, it is a stunning road to drive along. You will not be disappointed. But it's not a road designed for a lot of traffic. And as we can see, this car follows the Google Street View car for a long, long way. And it is absolutely beautiful. So, yeah. That's your small little teeny-wincy bit of an issue. Just a teeny-wincy bit of an issue. If I did, let's see, Google Street Maps, Scapa flow, and let's say I'd like to drive from, get directions from Rosyth. By car, from Rosyth, is roughly 7 hours and 18 minutes. It's not going to be a quick journey. If you're going from Portsmouth, that's 15 hours and 16 minutes. It's not going to be a quick journey. Yeah. So, the majority of flow now are tankers. Shamak, all this stupid, this are stupid questions. A bridge should be built just because of a bridge. No, justification required. More bridges are better. You suddenly sound like a gentleman on Twitter called Think the Fence. There we go. What a strange bridge or tunnel. There's someone to the northeast that loves building odd and long bridges and tunnels. Hey, that's Strider. Hey, that's the kind of roads I was saying about the other day. Middle of nowhere type. Yeah. I've driven a lot of those in my time. Seemingly, why do I always manage to set up these things 2.5 hours late? It's timing. Hurricane. Not only that, but I bet in the A836 is far better than it was then. Oh, it's tremendously better than it was in 1940. It is massively better than it was in the 1918s. And you don't want to know what it was like before World War One. Age of Vernon. Yeah. Courage 126. Well, we have the small road and a John Deere tractor. Now we need is the rusting tank being towed. You're on the strip. Neither are most of the roads I've seen trucks on in the UK. Yeah, but yeah, if you want to start supplying a major base, you need bigger trucks than that. And a lot more. What did I miss? Well, I think it's been okay tonight. I hope it's been good. Yeah, Ukraine questions welcomed. Well, while we got to sort of the end, yes, I'll start taking Ukraine questions. And I'll say thank you again for all the super chats and thank you for all the support and all the subscribing, liking, and the generally pressing on the buttons down there. I'm going to add something quickly on terms of the future. The future, as I'll talk about in the Long Patrol a bit, depends on what happens. If things start getting problematic and we have to start building up fleets again, then if you need a large fleet base in the north, Scapa Flow is a good place to pick. But that requires you having a very large fleet to need, in a state, a base the size of Scapa Flow to support it. And it will always be a forward operations base. It will never be the fully infrastructure supported base because of reasons discussed here. So that's the limitations. Scooter, have there been any studies to determine if scuttle ships could present an environmental hazard at some point? Yeah, they have studied them and they've looked into them. Basically, most of them went down with just coal on them. If you have an admiral ratings and need to go to ports or Scapa these days, the Iron still has aircraft, right? Not as many as you'd hope. Not as many as you'd hope. This is Roxo. The Isle of Man became a nexus of the Vikings and pirates sure in the Viking Age. Did the same happen in Orkney? And did the Norse use it as a base to sail to Iceland and Greenland? Yes, and yes to an extent. Although, to be fair, they had Faroe Islands and other places to go to, which allowed them to get up there. Oh, right. So, that's it. Open to questions now. Hope you've enjoyed it. And what have we got coming up? Ooh. By the way, next week is, of course, the summary of the counting class in War Retrospect, which I recorded today. And a few other things going on as well. Lane, I reckon it's a good time to ask the Irish government for a few burbs in Long Swilling and Bearhaven. Hey, if we need them. Nice idea, Furican. Excellent. I'm British. Making fun of infrastructure is one of our national pastimes. It is our national pastime. We have infrastructure. We need infrastructure. A lot of infrastructure. We don't have enough of it. Inca, would Rosyth be large enough and suitable for whatever the iron could become now? Pretty much. And it has the infrastructure to support it. But mostly these days, we're on the other side of Scotland. That's it. Why were the British slow to adopt the all-nothing arms scheme? Was it because it was unproven, or was there more to it? The British have a different philosophy when it comes to armouring, and the British don't really like the all-or-nothing scheme for various reasons to do with their ship design. But it makes sense for the US Navy to adopt it more quickly. The British are thinking about the Mediterranean, and that has an impact in terms of their belief over it. Because again, it's the all or nothing system works when you can keep a good range on your opponent. When you can't keep a good range, that's when you start to get problems. Averka, it must be a tough life in the Norfolk Mountain Rescue. You can find a mountain in Norfolk, I'd be very, very happy. Dr. Clarke, thank you, Stafford. In winter, in Canada, we have 2 seasons, winter and construction. Sounds good to me. In the UK, we have 4 seasons in one day most days. And also mostly thanks for the construction coming. Nice to know. What tomorrow's UAD video? Which ones would the questions be taken from? Questions are going to be recorded tomorrow morning, and they come from another of the treaty videos. The one I haven't done yet, basically. Mainly because it was going to take more time, and I thought it would be good to do it properly. Alright. Thank you very much, everyone. Jeff, didn't the RN conclude most of the High Sea Fleet were too deep to salvage and the cost would be far too great? Pretty much. But also, that was kind of helpful for them because it meant they didn't have to bother about them. The RN like not having to bother about things. It saves them money and time. Simon, okay, actual question. Was the fate of Moskva exactly as predicted by Millennium Challenge 2002? Not particularly. And as we'll be getting into it, it's a case of there are issues. There are issues with the Russian fleet. Moskva had some serious issues, and the Ukrainians took advantage of it. Alan Cash, I'm visiting HMS Belfast, Cuddy Sark, and Naval Maritime Museum tomorrow. Any insanely unknown facts on Belfast I can bore my wife with and all present with? Oh, so many. But the fact that her back was broken at the beginning of World War II is always a fun one, which is why one of the reasons why I think she survives World War II, because she gets to sit out so much at the beginning part of it. And yeah, I'm also up in London tomorrow evening, so I'll wish you luck and hope you're having fun. In the old history book, the whales have wings. The RAF and Royal Navy both attacked Toronto. And could an actual RAF wings and bombers followed by a fleet air arm strike have had any viability in reality? Certainly could have been interesting. Lynn Stewart, thank you. Interesting as always. Thank you. On the heavy bomber strike, let's be honest. If the heavy bombers had done anything, they'd have alerted the Italian defences, but they'd have also caused a lot of Italian ammunition to be used up. So the Italians might not have noticed the torpedo bombers coming in. So it could have been useful. Whether how much damage they might have caused, I'm not sure. Heavy bombers don't have that good a track record versus capital ships until they get some very, very big bombs and get far more accurate as the war goes on. But they could, in theory, have some skill. Master Mechanical, in the Ukraine war, an existential threat to Putin. Now, I asked you, I think, weeks ago. It's certainly getting problematic for Putin, but I don't think it's going to be an existential threat unless he starts to lose Crimea. And the trouble is, the more they keep chucking their units which are fighting at the Ukrainian defences, the weaker they become. And as a habit, what the Ukrainians do is they let the Russians expend themselves doing an offensive, and then they go on the counteroffensive once the Russians are expended. So for the Russians, I would not be thinking necessarily because I'm taking ground or am getting anywhere, I'm going to actually win anything. Ryan. Ryan, thank you very much, everyone, for watching. I hope you've enjoyed. I hope you found it useful. And yeah, I'm going to say thank you very much. I'm going to say have a nice evening. The Vickers Wellingtons are medium bombers. and I'm not sure where exactly they'd have launched from to hit Taranto. Probably would have had to launch from Malta, in which case you'd have probably had to support them somehow. That would be interesting. Similarly, sorry, one question about Moscow, because I can't find answers. Right. Is there anything of a nukey nature at the bottom of the Black Sea now? I'd say, considering the amount of efforts being put in by Russia and probably some of the other nations, yes, there is. Thank you, Colin Cameron. Very kind of you. Hope you all enjoyed, and thank you. Thank you very much, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. The only reason I'm going off now is because one of our dogs is currently a little bit on the ill side. Not massively, but Raleigh can't go. Raleigh, the fluffy research assistant, has managed to scratch his paw, so he can't go on walks at the moment. Which means his evening activity, because it's safe, is me playing bally with him in the lounge. That's me rolling the ball very carefully and after clearing out lots of furniture out of the way, and then him chasing the ball and bringing it back to burn his energy off. Which the Tafra finds upsetting because he's not allowed to take part of that because he keeps stealing the ball and turning into a chase which destroys furniture. And I have to do because I have to move the furniture in and out. So thank you very much everyone for watching. Hope you enjoyed and take care. And don't worry, he is okay. He's just managed to scratch his paw. Probably chasing Tafra, the Zebedee, the Tafra, round the garden. Vision. Ukraine seems to have adopted General Longstreet's offensive strategy, as he expressed Longstreet's at Gettysburg. It works sometimes. Thank you, Strider. Thank you, Calvin Gettysburg. Thank you, Bijan. Thank you, Miles McCaskill. Thank you, Roland. And thank you, Stafford. Thank you, everyone. Take care and have fun.